dare you? You have stolen my dreams and my childhood with your empty words, and yet I'm one of the lucky ones. People are suffering, people are dying, entire ecosystems are collapsing. We are in the beginning of a mass extinction, and all you can talk about is money and fairy tales of eternal economic growth. How dare you?
One of the most important things, never, ever quit. Never quit. One of the things about loving what you do is that it's not work, and therefore you don't quit automatically. It's a lot easier not to quit. But you can never give up.
It's harder than a lot of you thought it might be. Sometimes it may make you feel like that it's not possible. You might want to give up.
We believe in you.
Don't give up. I don't want you to feel discouraged. I want you to understand that it just means we got to push that much harder.
For God so loved the world, that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believeth in him should not perish, but have everlasting life.
Welcome to the live stream. It's what is it, Monday, Tuesday, Monday, September 1st, 2020. And today, as you could see from the title, what I wanted to talk about was fusion centers. What in the world is going on? So I want to talk about fusion centers and their impact on our lives right now. And one of the things that is going on with fusion centers right now is they are spying on Americans. And let's take a look at while people are joining the feed, let's take a look at some of the things people are saying about fusion centers on Twitter, and then I'll actually do a I'll read a description of what a fusion center is and its role in our government. And I just want to have a debate. I want to have a kind of a public debate about fusion centers and whether you think they're good or bad. I can tell you, initially they were part of the Patriot Act after 9/11, and there was huge debate in the libertarian world and in the on both sides, on the far on the left and on the right. Everybody was kind of universally against fusion centers, but the center just wanted to have them. They wanted them in the Patriot Act. They wanted to make sure that they could, spy on terrorists that were coming into our country, catch them, prevent terrorist attacks and things like that. Let's see what Twitter has to say. Just people on Twitter. This BlueLeaks is BlueLeaks was a massive data breach of many different law enforcement agencies that found out that the fusion centers across the country, because every state has a fusion center. It's either run by the government, the state government, or the federal government, but every state has a fusion center that coordinates all the law enforcement within that state. But BlueLeaks did a hack where they uncovered troves of information that showed that fusion centers were violating people's rights. BlueLeaks revealed fusion centers employ undercover agents to target activists. That's what it says right there on Emma Best. And organized group stalking. I find it disturbing the police and firefighters are involved in gang stalking, which I guess he's referring to like what fusion centers do. You forget paramedics, UPS, FedEx, the list goes on with the fusion centers. So it's a kind of an information gathering place that just gathers information from all sort of walks in your society and then gives it to the federal government so that they can organize the data, process it, and decide whether people are terrorists. Because that was, keep in mind, that was the point behind the fusion centers. But I think that that's what fusion centers are for, to kind of track domestic terrorists. So it went from tracking Islamic terrorists to now tracking domestic terrorists. But let's look at exactly what fusion centers are. Here's a national network of fusion centers fact sheet, and this is straight from the Department of DHS. You see the website dhs.gov up there at the top. So, national fact sheet on fusion centers. A fusion center is a collaborative effort of two or more agencies that provide resources, expertise, and information to the center with the goal of maximizing their ability to detect, prevent, investigate, and respond to criminal and terrorist activity. Baseline capabilities for state and major urban area fusion centers in October 2008. State and major urban fusion areas serve as a primary focal points within the state and local governments for the receipt, analysis, gathering, and sharing of threat-related information among federal, state, local, tribal, and territorial partners. Located in states and major urban areas throughout the country, fusion centers are uniquely situated to empower frontline law enforcement, public safety, fire services, emergency response, public health, critical infrastructure protection, and private sector security personnel to lawfully gather and share threat-related information. They provide interdisciplinary expertise and situational awareness to inform decision-making at all levels of government. Fusion centers conduct analysis and facilitate information sharing, assisting law enforcement and homeland security partners in preventing, protecting against, and responding to crime and terrorism. Fusion centers are owned and operated by state and local entities with support from federal partners in the form of deployed personnel, training, technical assistance, exercise support, security clearances, connectivity to federal systems, technology, and grant funding. Fusion centers contribute to the information sharing environment through their role in receiving threat information from the federal government, analyzing that information in the context of their local environment, disseminating that information to local agencies, and gathering tips, leads, and suspicious activity reporting from local agencies and from the public. Fusion centers receive information from a variety of sources, including SAR from stakeholders within their jurisdiction, as well as federal information and intelligence. They analyze the information and develop relevant products to disseminate to their customers. These products assist Homeland Security partners at all levels of government to identify and address immediate and emerging threats. Beyond serving as a focal point for information sharing, fusion centers add significant value to their customers by providing a state and local context to help enhance the national threat picture. Fusion centers provide the federal government with critical state and local information and subject matter expertise that it did not receive in the past, enabling the effective communication of locally generated threat-related information to the federal government. Integrating and connecting these state and local resources creates a national capacity to gather, process, analyze, and share information in support of efforts to protect the country. Our nation faces an evolving threat environment in which threats not only emanate from outside the borders, but also from within our communities. This new environment demonstrates the increasingly critical role fusion centers play to support the sharing of threat-related information between the federal government and the SLTT partners. Now, this paragraph right here was not part of the original Patriot Act that initiated the fusion centers. This was added afterwards, which all the libertarian groups out there, everybody that was against the Patriot Act, said they would do this. They said they would transition from spying on terrorists and trying to uncover terrorist activity within the United States to then spying on the citizens of the United States. So you can see the the good intention of the fusion centers, and you can see just with this evolution right here how it started to go bad. To prevent acts of terrorism on American soil, we must enlist all of our intelligence, law enforcement, and homeland security capabilities. we will continue to integrate and leverage state and major urban area fusion centers that have the capability to share classified information. That's the National Security Strategy back in May 2010. So you can see that they're still putting on this face that they're all about catching terrorism. And, I'm all for the fusion centers if that's what they do, only focus on foreign threats to our country. In 2007, the National Strategy for Information Sharing called for the establishment of baseline operational standards for fusion centers. In 2008, the federal government, in collaboration with the SLTT partners, published the baseline capabilities for state and major urban area fusion centers to establish baseline operational standards and to outline the capabilities necessary for fully operational fusion centers. By achieving the baseline capabilities, a fusion center will have the necessary structures, processes, and tools in place to support the fusion center process, or the fusion process, which of course the fusion process is to fuse different agencies together to gather that information and make sure it spreads out or disseminates out to all the different agencies. The FBI is coordinating with the ATF. The ATF is coordinating with the Homeland Security, which is coordinating with, the marshals, which is coordinating with state agencies like the state police and local sheriff's departments, things like that. During the 2010 Fusion Center Conference, Fusion Center directors, in partnership with the federal government, distilled the baseline capabilities for state and major urban area fusion centers into national network priorities, including 4 critical operational capabilities. These are sort of what fusion centers have evolved into. Ability to receive classified and unclassified information from federal partners. Okay. Analyze, ability to assess local implications of that threat information through the use of formal risk assessment processes. To disseminate, ability to further disseminate that information, that threat information, to other state, local, tribal, territorial, and private sector entities within their jurisdiction, which, notice that they throw on private sector entities, which later on in this live stream we will talk about. Also, this is a live stream, so if you have a comment, I am doing this live. Write your comment down and we will address it. Ability to gather locally generated information, aggregate it, analyze it, and share it with federal partners as appropriate. Additionally, both Fusion Center directors and the federal government identified the protection of privacy, civil rights, and civil liberties as a key priority and an important enabling capability to ensure fusion centers protect the privacy and other legal rights of Americans while supporting homeland security efforts. Isn't it interesting they put that in there? So they knew that this was going to be an issue, that they could walk right up to the line of civil rights and civil liberties, but they say that they're not going to go over those civil rights and civil liberties. I'll let you be the judge if that happens, if you think that that has happened by the end of this podcast or this live stream. Strengthening the ability of fusion centers to execute the COCs and ensure the protections is critical to buildings and integrated national networks of fusion centers capable of sharing information with the federal government and the SLTT partners during situations involving time-sensitive and emerging threats. For instance, in September 2010, federal, state, and local officials conducted a baseline capabilities assessment, the first formal assessment of fusion center capabilities. The data collected during the BCA provided a snapshot of a fusion center's capabilities and identified major trends as well as strengths and gaps across the national network. The current focus of the federal government is to support fusion centers in mitigating the capability gaps identified by the BCA and to assist fusion centers in reaching an enhanced level of capability for all 4 COCs and PCRCL protections. The Department of Homeland Security, in coordination with federal Interagency Partners has developed and provided a wide range of resources and services, including a guidebook, sample policies, templates, best practices, workshops, and various training sessions to support fusion centers in Maine, strengthening their COCs and PCRCL protections. The department will continue to assist fusion centers in fully achieving and maintaining the COCs and the protections. In recent years, partners at all levels of government have reiterated the need for unified and coordinated support for fusion centers. The federal government is committed to assisting them in becoming centers of analytic excellence that serve as focal points for the receipt, analysis, gathering, and sharing of threat-related information among federal and SLTT partners. Federal interagency partners including Department of Homeland Security, Department of Justice, the FBI, Office of the Director of National Intelligence, program managers for the ISE, Office of the National Drug Control Policy, and Departments of Defense are committed to providing effective, efficient, and coordinated federal support to fusion centers. In turn, fusion centers support the SLTT partners by developing actionable intelligence, disseminating relevant information to Homeland Security partners, participating in the nationwide SAR initiative, and supporting the maturation of their statewide fusion processes. Let's see, what does this say? Garrett Bell says, is a fusion center considered a private company? It's not considered a private company because a fusion center is federal. Well, it's a partnership between federal agencies and state agencies, and it is funded by both the federal government and the state government. But there are also industries that are considered essential industries that sometimes are connected to the fusion centers in some way. Like, for instance, they're set up to prevent terrorism. So what they wanted to do when they initially set them up was also include private companies that have to deal with infrastructure, like bridges and roads that are maintained by private companies, or a utility like a power company, or a dam, or that's maintained by a private company, or like a hydro dam, or a windmill that's maintained by a private company, or like a power company that does power lines in very rural areas. They would actually have access to information that the fusion center had. So it's a partnership between the federal government, the state government, and some industries that are considered essential industries, which is very interesting. A lot of people don't even know these fusion centers even existed. Like, in fact, in the wake of 9/11, even though the Patriot Act was heavily debated, there was little mention of the fusion centers. Nobody kind of knew the fusion centers were in that until after it was passed. Like the whole Nancy Pelosi said, we need to pass the bill in order to see what was in it. The same was true in the wake of 9/11 when they passed the Patriot Act, which had wide support because of what had just happened. But I mean, a lot of people that voted for the Patriot Act had no idea what was in it. And one of the things that was in it was these fusion centers. And it was a surprise when they started setting these up. Because basically, this was a massive federal government program set up to spy on, what they were calling anybody that was a threat to our infrastructure or our government through terrorism. But what the ACLU put together this cool little fact sheet about fusion centers that I think is very informative. And you can say what you will, whether you think the ACLU is lost its way or not, but I think that they do make some really good points in this fact sheet. Fusion centers were designed, right, so Clearview would be working with state police, so one could say Clearview is a private company, could be part of a fusion center. That's right, yeah. Exactly. In the state of Maine, I think, what is it? Is it Clearview? I'm not sure if it's Clearview in the state of Maine, but there's a company. Oh, what is it? Who is it called? There's a company, Central Maine Power, maybe. I don't know. It's something. It's a private company that's putting power lines through the state, and a lot of citizens are objecting to that, and they're protesting the power lines, and they're trying to make sure that power line does not go in. And it has come out, we'll get to this later, that the Maine Fusion Center was actually feeding information about the protesters to the private company, which I don't want to get quite into right now, but yeah, that's very interesting. So fusion centers were designed to organize localized domestic intelligence gathering into an integrated system that can distribute both data horizontally across a network of fusion centers and vertically down to local law enforcement and up to the federal intelligence community. These centers can employ officials from federal, state, and local law enforcement and homeland security agencies, as well as other state and local government entities. These federal intelligence communities, the military, and even private companies to spy on Americans in virtually complete secrecy. And that's important, because the fusion centers don't have to announce themselves. Everything they do is completely secret. And I mean, honestly, I didn't even know about fusion centers until about 3 or 4 months ago. That's how secret they were. And I am kind of in the intelligence gathering realm. I guess it's just you don't pay attention to something and it kind of slips by. But I think a lot of Americans were just like me and are not aware that there is this entire network that is secretly spying on, supposedly to catch terrorists. But we're going to see if terrorists is their only target here shortly. Garrett writes, once I fought against this for my aunt property, they were putting in smart grid in her easement. Yeah, so that happens a lot. And through eminent domain, they can take your property away from you. And what's scary about the fusion center process is because maybe they consider the power grid or the smart grid to be an essential project that needs to happen for the greater good, so they can actually sic this fusion center on your aunt in complete secrecy, spying on her, and then feeding her information to the power company or to whoever's putting that smart grid in. So it's almost like you're playing a game of poker or you're playing a game of cards, and there is a secret person that's walking around the table and telling you what all the other players have for cards. It's just, that's one way to look at it. We found that while fusion centers vary widely in what they do, but 5 overreaching problems with these domestic intelligence operations put Americans' privacies and civil liberties at risk. There's an ambiguous line of authority. In a multi-jurisdictional environment, it is unclear what rules apply and which agency is ultimately responsible for activities of the fusion center that the fusion center participates in. Private sector participation. Some fusion centers incorporate private sector corporations into the intelligence process, potentially undermining privacy laws designed to protect the privacy of innocent Americans and increasing the risk of a data breach, which we will discover actually did happen. In fact, if you go back to Twitter, you saw it right in my Twitter feed, that this right here, Blue Leaks, was a data breach. That was a data breach of fusion centers. This Blue Leaks, they hacked a bunch of fusion centers, gathered data that they had collected, and then released it. And tons of information came out as a result of the Blue Leaks. Military participation or private sector participation. Some fusion centers incorporate private sector corporations into the intelligence process, potentially undermining privacy laws designed to protect the privacy of innocent Americans, increasing the risk of a data breach, which we know did happen. Military participation. Some fusion centers include military personnel in law enforcement activities in a troubling way. There's actually a law that was passed at one point that said that the military was never to be used in domestic matters unless the president invoked some major thing. Then maybe you could, if there was like civil unrest, like the only example I can think of is the Civil War back in the 1860s. But there was a story back in the 90s about a cult in Texas, in Waco, Texas, a cult, the Branch Davidians, and the Attorney General at the time was Janet Reno, maybe, and she employed military tanks and personnel in order to bring an end to a standoff between the cult's members that were heavily armed and the FBI and ATF that were outside, and there was that led to more reforms about how you're not supposed to use military personnel to spy on American citizens. Now, the original intent of the fusion centers allowed military people into them because the intent was not to spy on Americans, but to spy on foreigners that were trying to cause harm to America through, terrorism. But some fusion centers include military personnel in law enforcement activities in troubling ways. And then, of course, there's data mining. Fusion centers, federal fusion center guidelines encourage wholesale data collection and data manipulation on processes that threaten privacy. And then there's excessive secrecy within these fusion centers. To the point where they never want information to get out. Fusion centers are characterized by excessive secrecy, which limits public oversight, impairs their ability to acquire essential information, and impedes their ability to fulfill their stated mission, bringing their ultimate value into doubt. So the ACLU goes on here to say that we urged policymakers to examine this emerging network of fusion centers closely and, at a minimum, to put rigorous safeguards in place to ensure that they would not become the means for a new era of police interrogation abuses or intelligence abuses. There were 40 fusion centers when the report was published. 6 months later, there were 58 fusion centers, and a growing number of news reports illustrated the problems that we identified. So in July 2008, we published a follow-up report. Today, there are at least 77 fusion centers across the country receiving federal funding. Since these ACL reports were published, a number of troubling intelligence products produced by fusion centers have leaked to the public. For example, a Texas fusion center released an intelligence bulletin that described a purported conspiracy between Muslim civil rights organizers, lobbying groups, the anti-war movement, a former U.S. Congresswoman, the U.S. Treasury Department, and hip-hop bands to spread Sharia law in the U.S. That's not terrorism. Although I do have a little bit of sympathy there. I don't think we need to have too much Sharia law in the U.S. But if it's Sharia law, if it's a religious sort of message, then I do have a problem with it. I don't know a lot about the Muslim faith. I'm not sure if the Sharia law is just part of their religious sort of message. Because if we are spying on a religious group, a religion, trying to spread their religion, then I have a serious problem with that. The same month, but on the other side of the political spectrum, a Missouri Fusion Center released a report on the modern militia movement that claim militia members are usually supporters of third-party presidential candidates like Ron Paul and Bob Barr. Okay, I have a serious problem with that. Why in the world would a fusion center care about militia groups and who they support politically? That doesn't make any sense to me. In March 2008, the Virginia Fusion Center issued a terrorism threat assessment that described the state's universities and colleges as nodes for radicalism and characterized the diversity surrounding a Virginia military base and the state's historically black colleges as possible threats. So this Fusion Center is spying on universities and colleges. Wait. They're spying on black universities and colleges? Like, seriously? We have secret government agencies that are spying on black colleges? Did I just read that correctly? A DHS analysis at the Wisconsin Fusion Center prepared a report about protesters on both sides of the abortion debate, despite the fact that no violence was expected. So now the Fusion Centers are spying on people that have strongly held political views. I mean, you can see what's going on here. You can see where this is building to already. These bulletins, which are widely distributed, would be laughable, except that they come with the imprimatur of a federally backed intelligence operation, and they encourage law enforcement officers to monitor the activities of political activists and radical and religious minorities. Let's see what Laurie Smith says here. Fusion centers do the targeting of us targeted individuals and hire the gang stalkers. That's pretty much it. You pretty much got it right there. That's what fusion centers are turned into. They've turned into an intelligence arm of the government to monitor the political activities of its citizens. But it's worse than that, because it's not the federal government, it's local state governments. So the federal government has basically funded and given local state governments a very secret intelligence arm specifically designed, with their only purpose and design to spy on, well, the original goal was to spy on foreign terrorists, but like in states like Maine and Vermont and New Hampshire, where there's not a lot of, I guess, terrorist target points, they've morphed into spying on people that are peacefully protesting the state, like the local state, not the federal government, but the local states. Fusion centers are also the focal point for growing suspicious activity reporting programs that encourage public reporting of like everyday activities. The Colorado Information and Analysis Center even produced a fear-mongering public service announcement asking the public to report innocuous behaviors such as photography, note-taking, drawing, and collecting money for charity as a warning sign of terrorism. Actually, on YouTube, which we're on now, there is a huge, I don't know what you call it, I guess movement or something, where it's called Photography is Not a Crime, where all they do is they just go to public buildings and they take out their camera and they start filming and wait for the police to react, and then they can make a great YouTube video that gets tons of views, way more views than I'll ever get. What does Lori say here? Started in Washington State when I lived next to a military jerk. I would like to find out where the Fusion Center is here in Casper, Wyoming. Yeah, it's usually run by the state police, or the biggest police organization in your state. Sometimes it's like in Texas, it's the Texas, what are they called? Now I forget what they're called, having a mine block. Anyway, the George Washington University Homeland Security Policy Institute published a survey of Fusion Center employees in September 2012, which characterized suspicious activity reports as white noise that impeded effective intelligence agencies. So there, you can see where this is building to. They just keep going away from their original mission to spy on terrorists. There is some good news, however. In 2010, DHS Homeland Security Grant Program established a requirement that fusion centers certify that privacy and civil liberties protections are in place in order to use the DHS grant funds. This is the first time DHS has acknowledged its authority to regulate fusion center activities, and it coincides with the establishment of a new DHS Joint Fusion Center Program Management Office to oversee DHS support of fusion centers. While these are only small steps, they are important advances toward establishing an effective governance and oversight structure over fusion centers, but reforms are not taking place fast enough in fusion centers, and the risks they pose only continue to grow. What's interesting is there's really no direct evidence that fusion centers have an oversight arm, and the DHS does not necessarily. I mean, the purpose of the fusion center was that it was a multi-agency fusion of information. That's what it was, multi-center fusion of information, meaning that it was by design not supposed to be managed or regulated or overseen by any individual agency. They all mingled together. So there's no clear oversight of fusion centers like so much of our government. They put in these, in October 2012, the Senate Homeland Security Committee Permanent Subcommittee on Investigations released a highly critical report on fusion centers, revealing that public officials' claim about their effectiveness were not accurate. The federal funds designated for fusion centers were not properly accounted for, and that intelligence analysts and reports officers lacked sufficient training to often produce reports that infringed on civil rights. In response, the Conservative Heritage Foundation called for cutting back the number of fusion centers. With ample evidence of abuse, the time has come for Congress and your local government representatives to act by cutting off funds to fusion centers that do not have a narrowly tailored law enforcement mission, strict guidelines to protect Americans' privacy, and independent oversight to prevent abuse. So you can see here that it's widely known that these fusion centers were a mistake. They just were. The states stopped caring about foreign terrorism, and the fusion centers were just used as a political arm to spy on its citizens. Now, I could go through examples in various different parts of the country that have had serious problems with these fusion centers, but the example that I want to get into now is my home state of Maine. Now, I don't live in Maine. I live in Boston. I'm a private detective. I live in Boston on a boat. And, but I grew up in Maine. And Maine is a state that I hold in my heart. I love Maine. I grew up in Maine. I love its coast. I love its mountains. I love to ski up there. My family lives, I don't know how many generation Mainer. Both sides of my family settled in Maine prior to it even becoming a state, which happened in 1820. So I think I have relatives that are buried in Maine from the 1700s even. So I have strong ties to Maine. But after college, I wanted to become a private investigator. I wanted to get into the private security sector. So I moved to Minneapolis, became a loss prevention detective, and then after I think 2 years of doing that, I found a company that would hire private investigators. I became an apprentice investigator, worked there for 2 years, almost 2 years, and then I started my own company. So that's just a brief history of why I love Maine so much. And also why I'm interested in these fusion centers is because of this right here. Maine State Police illegally collecting data on residents' lawsuit claims. And we would have never known that the Maine State Police were doing this if it wasn't for a brave Maine State Police trooper that blew the whistle on this. There's the Chief of the Maine State Police, Colonel John Cody. I believe him to be a pretty corrupt guy. Yeah, I wish. I tend to believe that the majority of police officers are good, hardworking people. But there are corrupt people in the police. And Maine happens to be, in my opinion, led by a dirty cop. A very corrupt and horrible guy. It's hard to even look at him. A division of Maine State Police illegally gathered and handled personal data about Mainers, according to an employment discrimination lawsuit filed in federal court by a state trooper. George Loader, 50, of Scarborough, is suing the Maine Information and Analysis Center and its supervisors, claiming he was demoted after he told his bosses that the center was collecting and maintaining data illegally, including information about people who had applied to buy guns from firearm dealers, those who legally protested, and those who worked at a Maine international camp for Israeli and Arab teens. The center is responsible for sharing information with other law enforcement agencies. The complaint does not say with which agencies the center may have shared the information other than the state police. It also does not say when the center began collecting it. Loader expressed his concerns to supervisors in November of 2017. Loader alleges that staff at the center, and we're talking about the Fusion Center whenever I say that, illegally gathered and kept information gleaned from social media about people who legally protested in September 2018 against Central Maine Power Company's proposed transmission corridor stretching from the Quebec border to Lewiston, Maine. For those of you that don't know where Maine is, we're up kind of tucked in the northeast part of the United States and in Canada. Basically, Maine just goes right up into Canada, but it's part of the United States, obviously. State police maintained a database that can be searched to determine if a person is prohibited from purchasing firearms, purchasing a gun. Applications to purchase firearms are supposed to be destroyed after the sale is approved, but the center stored that information in its database, the lawsuit claims, which is a federal law that after you do the background check and buy the gun, if you're a law-abiding citizen that is following and exercising your Second Amendment right to purchase a firearm, the state police is not supposed to keep a secret file on you after you've purchased that gun, but that's exactly what Maine is doing. Let's look at this comment here. DL, fusion centers, do fusion centers use nanotechnology for surveillance? As far as I know, they do not, but I have heard reports that make me concerned that it's possible. But there's no information out there that I can find in all my research that fusion centers use nanotechnology. In fact, I have a hard time believing that nanotechnology is being used other than in military applications. I don't think it's being used in domestic law enforcement applications yet. I'm not aware where they are with that technology. I would think that the private sector would kind of be ahead of the government sector on technology like that, or at least not far behind with where technology is going today. And right now, you don't see that sort of technology in the private sector. Any sort of nanotechnology that could be used for surveillance would be detectable. There's no way they could get away without you being able to detect it in some way. In another instance, the center allegedly stored information obtained from license plate scanners in Portland and other cities from vehicles that made frequent trips to New York City or towns in Massachusetts considered to be sources of drugs for dealers in Maine, longer than the 21 days that it can legally do so under state law. So you can see here, I'm all for catching drug dealers. I think everybody is. Let's catch drug dealers. Let's get them off the street. But this was the problem when they passed the Patriot Act, that it would be used to spy on citizens. And catching drug dealers is a domestic problem that the state police need to handle on their own. The state police can't tap into a secretive fusion center to help them investigate something that they should be doing on their own. This was the problem with fusion centers. And there was supposed to be a line in the sand where they didn't do that sort of stuff. But they crossed over that line, and now the line doesn't even exist anymore. The fusion center is not only fusing information, but now the fusion center has moved over toward just helping, being another arm of local law enforcement, which was not the original intent. We were told that wouldn't happen. The information is mined from the license plate data of the other agencies by computer without any pre-existing suspicion of criminal activity, the complaint said. So to explain that, it means that they're just basically investigating everybody. Whether you're an old grandma going to visit your relatives in Maine, or you're a tourist from Florida coming up to see Maine, or you're a 16-year-old kid driving his car for the first time by himself, you're all spied on. There's no probable cause. There's no reason. They don't have suspicion of you. They just do blanket mass surveillance on you. You see where this is going? This wasn't the intent. Data collection on, it also claims the center collected information on counselors and staff at Seeds of Peace, a summer camp in Otisfield created in 1993 when the late foreign news correspondent John Wallach brought a group of Israeli and Arab teens together. It has since expanded to focus on teenagers living in the United States. So this is a camp. I mean, maybe originally they thought that it might be a terrorist training camp or something. So yeah, sure, look at it. If you think foreign people are coming in to, set up a terrorist training camp, that's fine. But once you realize that it's not that, that it's somebody who's trying to bring peace to the world and make the world a better place, why would you continue spying on it? Data collection on the camp's employees ended in May 2018, the complaint says. Eric Capania of Seeds of Peace said Wednesday that since 2002, state police have conducted routine criminal background and sex offender status checks on applicants seeking to be counselors and provide security at the camp. Any information beyond criminal history or sex offender status was not communicated to Seeds of Peace at any point. We have no knowledge of the allegations in this complaint, he says. The lawsuit filed in U.S. District Court alleges that the state police violated the Whistleblower Protection Act and illegally retaliated against him, the George Loader, the whistleblower. It also names Colonel John Cody, the head of the Maine State Police, which oversees the center, and supervisors Lieutenant Scott Ireland and Sergeant Michael Johnston. All three of those people, Colonel John Cody, Lieutenant Scott Ireland, and Sergeant Michael Johnston, I believe, in my opinion, are the worst of the worst when it comes to corruption in Maine. These are some bad people. In my view, evil people. Loader filed a complaint with the Maine Human Rights Commission and received a right to sue letter before the agency was able to investigate any issue. Investigate and issue its initial findings. The American Civil Liberties Union of Maine called for investigation into the claims. Zachary Hayden, the group's legal director, said Wednesday that the organization has been sounding the alarm about the center since its inception. I think that most civil liberties organizations, including the ACLU and others, I mean, actually, it doesn't take civil liberties. Anybody with a brain knew that the fusion centers were going to turn into what we're learning that they're turning into. The Department of Public Safety should conduct an internal investigation and should publish the results. The governor should appoint an independent body. The governor should appoint an independent body to investigate the allegations, and the Maine legislature should exercise its oversight responsibility, he said. These are incredibly serious allegations with implications for the fundamental rights, the fundamental rights of all Mainers and fusion centers across the country, the fundamental rights of all Americans, I would go so far as to say, and they demand a serious response. Loader is seeking unspecified damages and asking that the court order the center to cease its alleged illegal activities. 2 state police vehicles were parked outside his home on Thursday evening when a Bangor Daily News reporter went to his home. He declined comment, saying the reporter should speak to his attorney, Cynthia Dill, who declined comment earlier. So 2 state trooper vehicles. So either George Loader is married to a state trooper, because I believe in Maine the troopers are allowed to bring their vehicles home with them, but you would only bring 1 vehicle home. So for 2 to be there, he's either married to a state trooper or another state trooper was visiting him. Or, of course, it could be that he was being monitored and he had a babysitter to make sure he didn't talk to the media. But that would be a conspiracy theory type thing. Let's see what this says. Jess, yes, I was told they are using me as a guinea pig. I hope I will set a precedent. I hope I will set a precedent. Okay. I'm not following those comments, but Stephen McCausland, spokesman for the Maine Department of Public Safety, referred a request for comment on the lawsuit to the Maine Attorney General's office, which disputed the allegations. A spokesman said the office will be responding accordingly in court, which is what they always say. The Attorney General's office, in answer to Loader's complaint to the Maine Human Rights Commission, said that Loader did not report suspected illegal activity at the center until after he was removed from a task force based in Portland, and he told he had to work at the center in Augusta. The office concluded that Loader had not presented evidence that the center had violated the Whistleblowers Protection Act. The Maine Intelligence Analysis Center was created in late 2006 by executive order to ensure that information collected by the U.S. Department of Homeland Security is shared between federal, state, local, county, and tribal authorities. It is funded in part with federal grants, and 6 civilian analysis positions are funded entirely through federal grants, according to the complaint, which is interesting. The state police basically get a secretive spy agency for free. Isn't that just convenient? By accepting federal funds, the MIAC, or that's what they're calling the Maine Fusion Center, Maine Information and Analysis Center, is bound to comply with federal law, including the Privacy Act and other related statutes, the complaint said. And that's laughable. They are definitely not complying with state law, with the federal privacy law. Loader was first hired by the Maine State Police in 1994. In early 2014, he was assigned to work in the FBI's Joint Terrorism Task Force, the JTTF, but Loader reported to the center's supervisor for administrative purposes, such as payroll and state-required training, and to the FBI supervisor for operational purposes. 3 years later, he first expressed concern about activities at the center when Johnston took over as supervisor and gave all state police personnel direct access to Maine Drug Enforcement Agency intelligence files, many of which included the identities of active confidential informants. Believing that these disclosures were made in error in violation of the law, Loader called Sergeant Johnson and expressed his concern that such disclosures were illegal, the complaint alleged. Johnston became annoyed and stated the confidential informants, chose to cooperate with the police. Insane. Once Johnston began supervising the center, he allegedly ordered Loader to participate in weekly conference call and share information about ongoing FBI investigations, which Loader claimed was against FBI policy. So you're starting to catch on here. Johnston, who is a dirty cop in my opinion, wanted Loader, who was on the JTTF and had access to FBI files, to take those files and give them to the state police, the Maine State Police, illegally, I might add. And he didn't care that it was illegal. Once Johnson began Okay, once Johnston began supervising the center, he allegedly ordered Loader to participate in weekly conference calls and share information about ongoing FBI investigations, which Loader claimed was against FBI policy. On May 15, 2018, Loader was reassigned from working with the FBI in Portland to a desk job in Augusta, working for the center overseeing its database. 2 hours from his home in Scarborough, the complaint said. Loader asked for a lateral transfer to the Major Crimes Unit, but was told he would have to interview for the position, which allegedly goes against internal state police policy. So he was clearly being retaliated against for blowing the whistle on this illegal activity. There's just no question about it. They reassigned him to a desk job 2 hours from his house. They don't follow standard state police internal policy for transferring people or giving them the opportunity to do lateral moves. And we'll go on here. Loader told Ireland and Johnston if his only option was to participate in the MIAC's illegal activities or face progressive discipline, then they were forcing him out of the state police and would force him to file a grievance, the complaint said. He took a medical leave and returned to the state police as a trooper. So huge demotion. What this article doesn't go into is a story that I wanted to just share, and I don't know why they didn't share it in this article. The only place that you can find it is if you read the actual brief that his lawyer filed. But Lieutenant Ireland and Sergeant Johnston had called Trooper Loader into a meeting in their office up in Augusta, at the Augusta campus, and for the state police. And during the meeting, they were really badgering him a lot, peppering him with questions, and he got a little. He at one point needed to go to the bathroom, and he made it clear that he needed to go to the bathroom. And Lieutenant Ireland said, "No, you're just trying to get away or delay or whatever, and I'm not going to let you go to the bathroom. You have to stay here." And eventually, he got so bad that he just knew that he needed to go. Otherwise, bad things were going to happen. So he leaves the room, the office where they were talking to him, walks into the hallway. Ireland and Johnston follow him into the hallway, yelling at him, telling him derogatory things, and threatening him. That is who Lieutenant Ireland and Sergeant Johnston, or now Lieutenant Johnston, are. Let's look at this comment from Garrett Bell. Garrett Bell, if you have a Wi-Fi, 4G, 3G, LTE, radio, smart TV, we are in the lab. A lot of places you go, you don't need any devices on your person to be tracked. It's all a big lab right now when it comes to surveillance. Oh, there you go. So that DL, does that answer your question at all? Oh, crap. Now I can't get rid of this because the comment was so big. I'll get here. Sorry. Live streaming. Just shock. The DHS infusion centers are using me as a guinea pig. Okay, that gives a little bit of clarity to it. I myself know for a fact that the Maine Fusion Center spied on me. As you're aware, I'm very critical of the Maine state government on. I'm not critical of the Maine state government, actually. I want to clarify. I'm critical of dirty and corrupt things that happen in the Maine state government. When I see dirty police officers or public officials or even titans of business, I call them out as being dirty. I think that it's your patriotic duty to call out when you see illegal and corruption, illegal activity, corruption, and dirty public officials or people in general. And I think that calling out the dirty cops is actually a great way to support the good cops. And again, I reiterate, I believe the majority of police in this country are good, honest police officers and public officials. There's just a few that are dirty. But the problem is the few that are dirty just sour it for everybody else. So there was an update where this guy, he put together a pretty good article, and it's a little more written from an entertainment standpoint, and I figured I would cover this as well. Suppose you live next to a police officer, but he's also a bird watcher and keeps a video camera on his front porch to record birds at his feeder. Each morning, as you go out your front door on your way to work, you know his video camera catches you. Sometimes you give him a wave or a wink or whatever. One day when you leave for work, he follows you with his camera. He gets a video record of how you spend your entire day, including what you do and who you meet with, everything. The next day, you ask him what he was doing. Usually friendly, he turns cold, not saying a word in response. Now you're really worried. He knows a lot about your business, which could be valuable to your competitors. So you go to the police department and you ask if he has turned in his video at work, because he's a police officer. They say nothing in response. And then they finally tell you to leave. And if you're insistent on getting the information, I made a video recently about Dorothy LaFortune, who was insistent about getting information, and they beat the crap out of her. This is not a fantasy. It can happen in the state of Maine. Following 9/11, the federal government decided to improve its intelligence about potential terrorists in the U.S. With its financial support, states joined in gathering information on people so terrorists' plans could be blocked. Most states created these so-called fusion centers. Here it is the Maine Information and Analysis Center. But there was a small problem. The federal and state governments did not know who were the potential terrorists, which made everybody a possible threat. That meant the police could collect information on anybody they wanted to, just in case they turned out to be a terrorist later on. Without much of a terrorist threat in Maine, which there's no terrorist threat in Maine, let's just be honest, those surveillance resources could be used to fight crime even before it was committed. I mean, think of that Tom Cruise movie, Minority Report, or I think that's what it was called, where basically he was a police officer that was in charge of catching people before they actually committed the crime. They had this computer that could predict if somebody was going to commit a crime. So he would show up prior to them committing the crime, arrest them, and say, "I hereby arrest you because you are about to commit a crime." Think about that. Without much of a terrorist threat in Maine, those surveillance resources, the fusion center surveillance resources, could be used to fight crime even before it was committed. Again, everybody in Maine or anywhere is a potential criminal. But Maine went a step further. Reportedly, it is one of only 2 states to pass a law allowing police to deny any information about these activities to anybody. It can compile files on anybody or everybody without telling a soul. We never find out about it. The Maine legislature was told that this law was meant to protect privacy. In the process of doing that, it doesn't protect us. It protects the police. I'll tell you about my story in a second. Why do you need protection from this secret surveillance if you are not a terrorist or a criminal? What difference does it make if the state police has a file on where you travel, what organizations you belong to, and where and who your friends are? The police say they only collect information, so they are not invading your privacy. So that's funny. So just because they just collect the information and look at it like a voyeur in secrecy. So they're not invading your privacy. Is there a difference between your daily departure for work and being recorded for a full day or maybe even several days? The police seem to think there's no difference. The U.S. Supreme Court, however, seems to disagree. In 2018, it ruled that police must get a court warrant before collecting cell phone records that show a person's movements. While those movements were public when they occurred, nobody could have tracked them or reconstructed them accurately without the police access to cell phone data. All your daily moves were public, but only by following you can police collect data on an innocent person for an entire day or week. So federal law is supposed to offer help. The records collected are not being kept for more than 5 years, but the secrecy of the Maine law prevents anybody from knowing if the state police is following that law. Think about it. In Maine, it's 100% private. It's secret. It's a secret data collection agency or secret spy agency that has zero accountability other than from who I believe is a dirty chief of the Maine State Police. This clandestine operation came to light because of this hero, this amazing state trooper, George Loader. A state trooper who claimed he was demoted when he found alleged illegal activity. Attempting to discredit the whistleblower, the police said he was sore about losing his job. Of course, that did not make him wrong about this. The revelation of this activity came as police are increasingly being examined for their abuse of powers. The Maine legislature has shown new interest in the Fusion Center and the laws covering it, but it's not clear if any action will be taken. Governor Janet Mills, formerly a district attorney and attorney general, who knew all about this Fusion Center and didn't tell us. She didn't tell us. She knew all about it. She supported it. She was using information gleaned from the Fusion Center in order to prosecute people. Is waiting for the whistleblower complaint to be completed. She has said the problem, if any, should be resolved under all pertinent federal and state laws. She has not suggested the current law should be reconsidered. That's the same thing that they said about slavery. I think we should end slavery using the legal system. We need to just let the legal system play out in the legislature. That's what they said about, the Germans said about when they took people, did what they did to them. I think we just need to follow the law and let the government do what it's doing. They know what they're doing. Few argue against a strong and competent police force, but many now insist it must be accountable for operating as much in the interest of average people and as in preventing terrorism or crime. I mean, can't we all agree? Isn't that something we can all agree on? That the police should protect the civil liberties of law-abiding, non-criminal citizens that aren't doing anything wrong, that are just minding their own business, that are just running their own business, that are just trying to fulfill their constitutional right to life, liberty, and happiness. Without reasonable rules and oversight by elected officials, the concern is that police will exceed their mandate and abuse their powers. One of the most well-known cases of abuse was the East German Stasi, the police force that seemingly had a file on everyone. What was a normal activity last week could become a crime this week, and the Stasi already had the evidence. That is what you call a police state. Closer to home was J. Edgar Hoover, the longtime head of the FBI. He developed files on people, intending to threaten them with information from their private lives. Most famously, he collected information on Martin Luther King Jr. that had nothing to do with criminal activity. Keep in mind, Martin Luther King Jr. was a civil rights protester and leader. That's what he was, and he believed in nonviolent protests. That was his mission, nonviolent protests. He gave speeches. He organized rallies. If there was social media back in Martin Luther King Jr.'s day, he would be the most popular person on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, and anything else. And it had nothing to do with criminal activity when they were spying on Martin Luther King. When J. Edgar Hoover was amassing those files on people so that he could blackmail them, they did nothing wrong. They weren't criminals. The Maine whistleblower went further than claiming abuse of police power. He said that the Fusion Center had videos of demonstrators against the transmission line of Central Maine's power parent company and gave the video to CMP. The demonstrators broke no law and are constitutionally protected. So why in the world is this Maine Fusion Center spying on constitutionally protected activity? I asked both the CMP, Central Maine Power, and the state police if any information had not been provided. Not surprisingly, I received no answer from the police, thanks to the Maine law that allows it not to respond. Can you believe that? Maine has a law. Anyway, but the law does not prevent it from answering. CMP said its parent company, which has been charged with no wrongdoing, was investigating the matter. Apparently, it takes weeks or months for the company to determine if it received a video. Just roll your eyes at that. A CMP representative has a seat on the Fusion Center board. Remember what we were talking about earlier? How private industry has a seat on these fusion centers so that they can spy on people, on their competitors? The whistleblower is suing for his previous rank and job. There will be more to this story. Garrett Bell, good old Ronald McRegan, our first real bot actor, was the Spillgate for subversion into the U.S. I wish I knew what you were talking about there. I'm sorry, I don't. Under Obama, these things were popping up everywhere in the U.S. I wonder what happened to them. They're still here, alive and well. Finally, someone is bringing the topic of fusion centers. Now, thank you. And it needs to be brought out. These fusion centers are a travesty of American civil liberties. They are taking away our right to free speech, our Fifth Amendment rights, our due process, our our Fourth Amendment right of illegal search and seizure. I mean, these fusion centers single-handedly are subverting the entire United States Constitution, and we just sit back and let it happen. I'm sorry, I'm getting a little upset. So, I recently discovered that the Maine Fusion Center spied on me back in 2016 when I was I had no activity going on in Maine. All I was doing was posting articles that were critical of the Maine State Police because they violated my constitutional rights when they denied a private investigation license based on a bogus charge. Rather than go through years and years of legal wrangling, I decided to enter into a consent agreement with them back in 2015 about that private investigation application. And the consent agreement basically said that I would withdraw my application for private investigator, wait 12 months, and then reapply. It was simply that. And by doing that, I eliminated endless appeals that would potentially go all the way up to the Supreme Court, because the Maine State Police do not give private investigator licenses to anybody that's not a former state trooper or very well connected or in law enforcement. And I was none of those. I was not a former state trooper, I was not well connected, and I was not in law enforcement. And the reason they don't give them is just cronyism. The law actually says that I qualify for the PI license. So the only way they can stop me from getting a PI license is just to make up bogus things. In 2003, when I applied, they made up parking tickets and a speeding ticket. In 2011 or 12, when I applied, they made up that I came to Maine and worked without a license, when it was not true. And it was thrown out of court. The judge dismissed it before they even brought it to trial. But then they went ahead and denied me anyway. And because the standard of proof is different, my lawyer felt like, well, let's just enter this consent agreement rather than go through endless appeals. We wait a year, you reapply. Well, we signed that consent agreement in late 2015. In 2016, there was no reason for them to be looking at me. But for 6 months or more, I only have records of 6 months. For all I know, it was longer. They compiled a file on me that they later included in the discovery materials when they denied my license a third time based on my criticism of them on social media. That was actually the reason why they denied me the third time, because I was critical of the state police on social media. They didn't think that I was competent enough to be a private investigator in the state of Maine. Let's forget the fact that I'm a PI in Massachusetts, New Hampshire, Vermont. I was previously licensed in New York and New Jersey. I hold a license out in Tennessee. I can work, I'm extremely qualified. I've been doing this nearly 18 years. Let's forget about all that. With no complaints, not a single customer has ever complained about me. Not a single person I've spied on has ever found out to the point where they've complained about me. Nobody said I do anything unethical or illegal or anything like that. But the Maine State Police said, well, because you were critical of us on social media, specifically surrounding my criticism of the way they handled a police-involved shooting, we're going to deny your PI license. Well, as part of the discovery material in that denial, when I appealed it, obviously, and I should have just continued with the appeals in 2012, because now I'm in endless appeals now. This has been going on for 3 years now, and it looks, and now I'm at the Supreme Court level at the state of Maine, and if I lose there, which I may not, who knows, with the corruption up in Maine, then we're going to the U.S. Supreme Court. So this could be, 3, 4, 5 years before this is all settled. Who knows how long it takes to go to the Supreme Court, and if they even take my case. But the point that I'm making is that as part of the discovery material for that denial, they included the whole section of what they gathered on me and compiled on me prior to me ever applying for that license this latest time. And that information comes straight from the Maine Fusion Center. And what was I? I mean, I'm not going to compare myself to Martin Luther King. I'm nowhere close to him. But I was just a protester, a peaceful protester, posting my criticism on social media. That's all I was. But because I did that, I garnered the attention of an illegal, secretive Maine State Police Fusion Center. Oh yeah, and by the way, who was the people that I was critical of on social media? Well, their names are Lieutenant Scott Ireland, Sergeant Michael Johnston, and a few others. Do you remember the names of the people who retaliated against George Loader, the whistleblower who brought out the illegal activity of the Fusion Center? Well, let me remind you of those names. Lieutenant Scott Ireland, Lieutenant Michael Johnston. The exact same people that I complained about on social media are the people that retaliated against this whistleblower, George Loader. Think about that. Military contractors make a lot of money off us targeting individuals. I think they do. The CMP issue. CMP is owned by Avangrid LLC. The vice chairman is former governor of Maine, Baldacci. Not surprising. Check that out. Wow. Thank you for that comment. The corruption in Maine is just, every day I learn more and more about it. It gets worse and worse and worse and worse. In fact, I've been posting about Maine corruption, and I just had this strange development happen to me. I don't even know what to make of it at this point, but I'm trying to figure out what it means and this is an interesting development. Oh, wait. I guess I can't bring that out. But anyway, look at my past video. there was the Attorney General's office sent my lawyer a letter that basically said that the FBI had received they had received information that somebody was impersonating me and trying to set me up for a federal harassment charge, which would put me in prison a very, very long time. And luckily, when the matter went to the FBI, they determined that it wasn't me, and so they were just warning me that somebody was impersonating me and using my identity. But what was very confusing about this was that it went from the FBI to the Maine Attorney General office, to my lawyer, and to me. And I don't understand that chain of evidence. It doesn't make sense to me. Why is the FBI contacting the Maine Attorney General's office? It confuses me. And the only thing I can think is that this this investigation started at the Maine State Police. And then the Maine State Police probably were going to stick a false charge on me. But because I live in Massachusetts, they had to get the federal government involved. And I think that FBI agent just saved my butt. Strange things. I can't believe I don't have that redacted letter here. I don't know what I did with it. I must have deleted it. Anyway, I covered what I wanted to cover here in this live stream. I hope that you enjoyed it. Thanks for commenting as we went through this interesting information. I really appreciate that, that people out there are interested in the corruption of these fusion centers, these secret, oftentimes state police involved fusion centers that literally can do whatever they want to you. They can collect data on you. They can spy on you. There's little to no oversight of them, even though people say there's not. This is a problem. And if these fusion centers are allowed to continue, we can kiss the Constitution goodbye forever. We have such a short amount of time to correct some of these massive surveillance injustices and civil liberties injustices that are going on right now. Such a massive corruption. We have such a little amount of time left to get rid of this before we've lost the America that believed in individual freedoms and rights and believed that the government worked for us and not the other way around. It's time for real police accountability, government accountability, and reforms that do away with all this nonsense. I don't know what the answer is. I think citizen oversight committees, real citizen oversight committees that have bite, are the answer, where public officials, when they do something wrong, they have to quiver in their feet, just like we do when we're arrested and have to go in front of a jury. When they do something wrong, it's automatic that a pool of 12 people out of the voter pool, or a group of 12 people out of the voter pool, form a committee that's different every single time. It's basically like a jury. And the government official has to stand in front of that jury and defend his actions. And if that jury, which is not rigged, it's randomly picked every single time, just like a jury for a murder trial, if that public official can't defend his actions and convince that jury that he should keep his job, then he should be fired. That's how we get real police accountability and government accountability implemented, in my humble opinion. Thanks for watching. I'm going to play you this video, and I think that you're going to enjoy it. Prior to Maine denying my PI license, I really was invisible. I just kept to myself. I did my own thing. I worked hard, kept my nose to the ground, built up my business, and then boom, I run into a brick wall of corruption up in Maine. If I hadn't have run into that brick wall of corruption, I would not be posting these videos right now. I would not be exposing corruption all throughout Maine government, pervasive corruption that infects every aspect of the public sector in the Maine state government, from the state police to local sheriff's departments to industries where cronyism just runs rampant. In fact, the corruption in Maine is so blatant and in your face, it just surprises me. You know, my life seemed more peaceful and more tranquil prior to knowing that my home state, the state that I love, the state that I want to move back to, the state that I wanted to move my family to and raise my kids in, is just so corrupt. And I'm speaking to the public officials right now, the public officials, the corrupt and dirty public officials in Maine. All you had to do was give me the PI license and I would have just shut up. I wouldn't have said anything. I would have just moved on with my life. I didn't want this fight. I mean, we have to be the change we want to see in the world, and when you see corruption as bad and as blatant as I see in Maine, what choice do I have? I don't want this for myself, but what choice do I have? So thanks for watching. Please keep the conversation going in the comment section after this is finalized. Like the video. That helps it spread around YouTube. Share the video if you don't mind. Let's get this message out there. That's an important message that needs to be spread. And also, if you haven't subscribed to my channel, please subscribe to my channel as well. Thank you so much. I'd like to give a shout out to the Maine Fusion Center, a secret Maine State Police Department set up in the wake of 9/11 to spy on terrorists, but now spy on anybody who's a little critical of the state of Maine. They have spied on me, they've spied on peaceful protesters, they've spied on people that were against a power line going through Maine, they've spied on Black Lives Matter protesters, and they are my most loyal fan. They've watched all my videos, read all my posts, so a big shout out to the Maine State Police Fusion Center. These videos do take a lot of time. I don't make money on them, so if you would not mind, go check out my website, nationalsi.com, and if you know anybody who does insurance fraud assignments, insurance adjusters, lawyers, please email me their contact information so that I can reach out to them. I'm in the New England area. I'm licensed in Massachusetts, New Hampshire, Vermont. I work in Rhode Island, and also I'm down in the South too, in Tennessee. So any of those areas are great. If you know people that are in the industry, please forward their information. It would be very, very helpful. Also check out my store. You can buy cool t-shirts and mugs and different things that help support my work. I just want to get to the truth. That's my goal with every case, with every story that I do, and the truth and uncovering the truth is very important, no matter where it leads.
Let not your heart be troubled. Ye believe in God, believe also in me. In my Father's house are many mansions. If it were not so, I would have told you. I go to prepare a place for you. And if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come again, and receive you unto myself, that where I am, there ye may be also.